At exactly 7:30 in the morning, Captain Ibrahim Traoré stepped into his office at the Burkina Faso presidential palace, expecting the usual quiet start to his day. For the past 2 years, a soft-spoken woman named Fatou Diallo had been there, like clockwork, tidying up his workspace, emptying the bins, straightening papers, keeping everything in order. She blended into the background so seamlessly, no one gave her a second thought. But today, something was different. Sitting on Traoré's desk was a classified report from Mali's intelligence service. The contents were enough to make his blood run cold. Fatou Diallo, the modest, hardworking cleaner, wasn't who she appeared to be. For the past 24 months, she had been an undercover operative, quietly siphoning off Burkina Faso's most sensitive secrets. Every scrap of paper, every whispered conversation, every password left scribbled on a notepad, she had captured it all. And she had been feeding this information straight to foreign intelligence agencies. In less than 6 hours, this colossal breach of national security would become public knowledge. Captain Traoré faced an urgent, devastating decision. How do you neutralize a spy hiding in plain sight, right in the heart of your own palace? But to understand how they got here, we need to rewind the clock back to the day Fatou first set foot inside the palace 26 months earlier. On paper, Fatou was the perfect candidate. A widowed mother of 3, struggling to make ends meet. She came across as an ordinary woman trying to provide for her family. Her background checks were clean. Her references were spotless. There was no reason to suspect anything was amiss. But behind the scenes, a very different story was unfolding. As soon as Traoré's rise to power shook up the political landscape, foreign intelligence agencies began plotting. They needed eyes and ears inside the presidential palace. And they found their perfect asset in Fatou. It started innocently enough. Fatou, drowning in financial hardship, was approached by a charity claiming they could help pay for her children's education. In return, they only asked for small favors, simple things like describing the work environment at the palace. Works there? What departments are on site? What's the general mood among staff? Fatou didn't see the harm. But over time, the requests grew bolder. By the 7th month, she was asked to discreetly photograph documents she found in trash bins. Meeting notes, draft memos, sometimes even copies of confidential files. It felt like a small price to pay for her children's future. As months passed, Fatou's role evolved. She became more than a passive informant. She was trained in espionage, tiny hidden cameras, concealed microphones, tools she learned to use with unnerving precision. She began memorizing sensitive tasks, notes left on Traoré's desk, eavesdropping on his most private meetings, recording conversations that were never meant to leave those 4 walls. By the 2nd year, the operation reached a whole new level. Fatou was entrusted with devices designed to breach computer systems. Under the guise of cleaning, she would subtly plug them in, giving foreign operatives access to files that should have been impenetrable. Day by day, she built an invisible archive of Burkina Faso's deepest secrets. Every critical phone call, every strategic discussion, she was there, dusting shelves, arranging papers, while mentally logging every detail. And now the magnitude of what she had done was undeniable. Captain Traoré had 6 hours before this shadow war erupted into full-blown scandal. A trusted face had become the greatest threat to his presidency and the nation's security. Burkina Faso's military strategies, economic blueprints, sensitive diplomatic talks, even Captain Traoré's private musings. Nothing had escaped Fatou Diallo's reach. Every detail she gathered was quietly relayed beyond the palace walls, fueling a foreign intelligence operation that had gone unnoticed for nearly 2 years. But the cracks began to show in March 2024. An unapproved military operation, plan known only to a tight circle of top officials, somehow surfaced in foreign media. The leak was not just embarrassing, it was dangerous. Traoré knew this. Wasn't a simple slip-up. Someone inside the palace was betraying them. He launched an immediate internal investigation. The first wave of suspicion fell, as expected, on high-ranking officials. Ministers, generals, senior advisors, their calls were monitored, their files checked, but no smoking gun emerged. Frustrated, the investigation widened to include palace. Technicians, IT specialists, security guards, communication staff. Again, nothing. The trail had gone cold. That's when Mali's intelligence agency proposed a different approach. Forget the files. Watch the people. They began mapping the daily movements of every individual inside the presidential complex. Who went where? For how long? Was anyone acting off? The answer, as it turned out, was hidden in plain sight. Fatou Diallo, while most cleaning staff zipped through offices in 15 to 20 minutes. Fatou consistently spent 45 minutes to an hour in Traoré's office. Always alone, always meticulous. What initially seemed like dedication to her job now raised alarms. Mali's operatives placed her under quiet surveillance. For the first week, she appeared perfectly ordinary home. Work. Back home. Nothing. Out of the ordinary. But in the second week, things shifted. One evening, instead of returning home, she made a detour to a small, inconspicuous cafe across the city. There, she met a man, identity unknown, for a brief 10-minute conversation. No documents changed hands, but the meeting felt staged. Mali's team kept watching. At their next observed rendezvous, Fatou carried a small envelope. This time, there was no subtlety. She passed it directly to the contact. That was it. They had her. But instead of arresting her on the spot, Mali intelligence made a bold decision. Wait. They wanted the full scope of the operation, who she was working with, how deep the leaks went, and most importantly, who was pulling the strings. Over the next month, Fatou's activities unfolded like a masterclass in espionage. She wasn't just gathering scraps from Traoré's office. She was sweeping through the entire palace, photographing notes in the cabinet meeting hall. Digging through trash bins in the security control center, even chatting up kitchen staff to fish for sensitive conversations. Her tools were deceptively simple. Tiny cameras hidden in cleaning supplies. Miniature microphones stitched into her uniform. USB devices that unlocked computer systems when no one was looking. It was a level of precision and sophistication that could only come from a professional intelligence operation. But what hit the hardest was the discovery of her network. Fatou's immediate handler was a local intermediary. But the operation's real command center was a foreign intelligence agency, one that had been strategically embedding itself in Burkina Faso's affairs since Traoré's rise to power. By the end of April 2024, Mali intelligence compiled a bombshell report. It landed on Captain Traoré's desk with the weight of 1,000 bricks. As Traoré read through the report, his face hardened. Hundreds of classified documents had passed through Fatou's hands: military strategies, economic forecasts, confidential diplomatic exchanges. Even his personal notes jotted down in moments of solitude. Worse still, some of this stolen intelligence had already been weaponized. Diplomatic efforts had been sabotaged. Military operations had been compromised before they even began. For Traoré, this wasn't just a breach of security. It was a personal betrayal orchestrated with chilling patience right under his nose. The clock was now ticking. The spy inside his palace had been unmasked. But neutralizing this threat would require a move as calculated and silent as the operation that brought them here. The consequences of Fatou Diallo's betrayal were already bleeding into Burkina Faso's future. Military campaigns had been sabotaged. Economic deals collapsed before negotiations even began because their strategies were already known to foreign powers. Captain Traoré knew this wasn't just a breach. It was an invisible war, and they were losing. But he couldn't afford a reckless response. Stripping Fatou from her post immediately would only erase the chance to uncover the entire network behind her. This wasn't about catching a spy. It was about dismantling an entire espionage web. So Traoré made a hard choice. Fatou would stay in her role for now, but this time, the palace would be watching her, not the other way around. On May 5th, 2024, everything unfolded like a normal morning. Traoré sat at his desk as if nothing was wrong. Fatou arrived punctually, carrying her usual cleaning supplies, wearing the same quiet expression that had made her invisible for so long. But hidden in the corners of the room, tiny surveillance cameras were capturing her every move. What they recorded was chilling. Fatou glided through her routine with surgical precision. She seemed like just another cleaning staffer adjusting picture frames, dusting shelves, but in reality, she was executing a sequence of covert tasks. She would reorganize the desk just enough to photograph sensitive documents. From the trash can, she plucked out selected papers and slipped them into her apron. As she wiped near the computer, she quickly connected a small data device, its LED light flickering for mere seconds. The most critical moment came when Traoré took a phone call. Fatou stayed in the room, pretending to mop a corner of the floor, but her attention was laser-focused on every word exchanged. After Traoré hung up, she swiftly scribbled down notes with astonishing recall. By day's end, Mali intelligence had seen enough. They had captured the anatomy of a spy at work. An operation plan was drawn immediately. It had to be flawless. The objective was twofold: apprehend Fatou in the act and follow the threads of her network as far as they would go. The team picked May 12, 2024 as the day to strike. That morning, Fatou arrived as usual. But today, something was off. She lingered, longer than normal, in Traoré's office. Her routine had become slower, more deliberate. When she reached into the trash can, her hand emerged, holding several high-level documents. She swiftly photographed them, then moved towards the president's desk with her tiny computer device in hand. That was the moment. The office door burst open. 3 intelligence officers entered swiftly but silently. Fatou froze the camera, still in her grip, the hacking device resting plainly on the desk. There was nowhere to run. Fatou Diallo, you are under arrest for espionage against the state of Burkina Faso, the lead officer declared. Fatou's face turned ashen. After nearly 2 years of shadow operations, her double life had been cornered. In the initial interrogation, Fatou clung to denial. I'm just a cleaner. I don't know what you're talking about, she repeated. But the evidence piled against her was overwhelming. Videos, audio recordings, photographs, transaction records. The walls of denial crumbled. Quickly, by the second day, Fatou broke. Tearfully, she admitted to accepting money that had gone straight to her children's education and household expenses. What began as small, harmless requests had spiraled into an operation that sold out her nation's deepest secrets. She detailed the entire recruitment process, from the first innocent meeting with so-called charity representatives to the moment she realized she was trapped in a machine far bigger than herself. Her most haunting confession was simple, but it cut through the coldness of the room. I did it for my children's future. I had no other choice. The words landed like a punch. Fatou wasn't a villain by nature. She was a mother who had been exploited by forces who knew exactly how to turn desperation into loyalty. But the investigation didn't stop there. As Fatou's confessions poured out, a larger picture emerged. She wasn't the only mole inside the palace. At least 2 other staff members were now under suspicion, individuals whose roles seemed too minor to matter, yet whose movements and behavior suddenly fit a troubling pattern. What had begun as a single spy's arrest was now morphing into the exposure of a much deeper infiltration, one that could shake Burkina Faso's leadership to its core. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Fatou Diallo had not been working alone. The palace had more cracks than anyone had imagined. The second suspect emerged from an unlikely place: the palace kitchen. A kitchen assistant, seemingly harmless, had been quietly eavesdropping on ministers' private conversations during their lunch breaks. The third suspect was more technical, a maintenance worker who had discreet access to the palace's communication systems. This person had the ability to monitor phone lines and internet traffic without raising a single eyebrow. It was a rude awakening. The problem wasn't just one rogue agent. The entire security culture of the palace had been dangerously naive. Anyone from janitors to IT technicians could be an intelligence leak if the system was built on trust alone. Captain Traoré knew this wasn't just an espionage scandal. It was a security philosophy failure. In response, he launched a full-scale security overhaul that would transform Burkina Faso's presidential palace forever. The first step was immediate. Every single palace employee was put through fresh security screenings. This time, no stone was left unturned. Financial histories were examined. Personal relationships were scrutinized. Out of this process, 12 additional employees were flagged as security risks. Some were dismissed, others reassigned away from sensitive areas. Next came the technological defenses. Advanced surveillance cameras were installed not just for show, but with real-time monitoring and data tracking. Computer systems were upgraded with robust encryption protocols. Access to sensitive information was no longer granted by rank. Alone, every access point required multi-layer authentication. Even something as mundane as waste disposal was overhauled. Confidential documents were now destroyed under strict supervision. But technology alone wasn't enough. The third reform focused on people. All palace employees, from the highest-ranking officials to the cleaning staff, underwent mandatory security awareness training. They were taught how to spot suspicious behaviors, how to protect sensitive information, and most importantly, that security wasn't someone else's job. Fatou Diallo's trial began in October 2024. She stood in court and, without excuses, took full responsibility. "I betrayed my country," she said. "I am ready to face the consequences." But the court also recognized the human tragedy. Within her actions, a widowed mother of 3 ensnared by economic hardship and foreign manipulation. The verdict reflected both justice and mercy. 8 years in prison, reduced to 5 for good behavior, and a mandate to repay the illicit funds she had received. Her co-conspirators faced their own judgments. The kitchen assistant was sentenced to 4 years. The technical staffer received 7. The local contact who coordinated these leaks got 6. As for the foreign intelligence operatives, they were swiftly exposed and deported. A clear message sent. This crisis left a permanent scar on Burkina Faso's leadership, but it also sparked a transformation. Traoré didn't spin the event as a shameful cover-up. Instead, he turned it into a learning moment for the nation. In a press conference following the trial, he said, "Fatou's story taught us a hard truth. Security isn't about walls or gates. It's about vigilance in the quietest corners of our daily routines. We will not make the same mistake twice." And he meant it. 6 months later, the palace reported 0 security breaches. Employees, once indifferent, were now proactive, spotting, reporting, and preventing potential risks. Security wasn't just a policy. It had become a mindset. A year after Fatou's arrest, her story was being studied in universities and military academies around the world as a textbook example of internal threat management. It became a cautionary tale for intelligence agencies everywhere. The perfect illustration of how the smallest oversight can lead to the gravest dangers. But perhaps the most unexpected twist was Fatou's own journey. In prison, she found a new role, not as a spy, but as a teacher. Security experts visited her regularly. She explained in detail how she had exploited loopholes manipulated daily, routines, and bypassed outdated protocols. Ironically, the very person who exposed Burkina Faso's vulnerabilities was now helping to close them. 2 years after the scandal, Burkina Faso's palace security system was being hailed as one of the most advanced in Africa. The sting operation that had once embarrassed the nation had now become a catalyst for its greatest security achievement. On the 3rd anniversary of Fatou's capture, Traoré delivered a speech that resonated far beyond his country's borders. We paid a bitter price for our carelessness. But because of that lesson, we are now stronger. Our security isn't just a shield, it's a culture. That single sentence summed up the entire journey, from betrayal to resilience, from crisis to opportunity. And from that day on, in Burkina Faso's presidential palace, no one, no matter how ordinary they seemed, was ever overlooked again. For years after her arrest, Fatou Diallo walked out of prison a free woman. Her sentence had been shortened for good behavior, but more importantly, for her contributions to the very field she had once threatened. Her insights into espionage methods had helped shape Burkina Faso's new security protocols. Upon her release, Fatou requested a meeting with President Traoré. The moment was heavy with emotion. Standing face to face with the man whose trust she had betrayed, Fatou apologized. Once more, she spoke not as a spy, but as a mother who had made devastating choices. Traoré's response was calm, yet profound. "We all make mistakes," he said. "The important thing is to learn from them." That meeting marked the beginning of a new chapter for Fatou. She didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, she turned her story into a lesson. Today, she works as a consultant for a private security firm, training organizations on how to detect internal threats. Her experience, once a weapon against her country, had become a shield to protect others. But the true legacy of the Fatou Diallo operation wasn't just about her redemption. It was about the transformation of an entire system. Burkina Faso had learned a bitter lesson. Security isn't just the domain of intelligence officers or surveillance systems. It's everyone's responsibility. One of the most critical discoveries from Fatou's case was her psychological profile. Security experts classified her as a forced agent, someone driven not by ideology or malice, but by economic desperation. This understanding shifted how internal threats were viewed. The focus was no longer just on catching traitors, but on identifying vulnerabilities before they could be exploited. Traoré's personal reaction was equally instructive. After his initial shock, he had chosen empathy over anger. "She is also a mother," he once said in a private meeting. "She did it for her children." It's leadership in navigating. This crisis, with both firmness and understanding, became a model for crisis management in leadership courses. Yet, despite all the strategic implications, the human element of the operation was never forgotten. One of the most haunting moments was during Fatou's capture. Holding a computer device in her hand, realizing the operation was over, she had broken down in tears. "What will happen to my children?" she had asked through sobs. It was a stark reminder that behind every headline, every classified report, there are human lives tangled in complex choices. The post-operation reforms brought profound changes. Burkina Faso adopted a new principle: trust but verify. Blind trust was no longer acceptable, but neither was treating every employee as a suspect. A careful balance was struck: vigilance without paranoia. Over time, security incidents within the palace dropped to zero. But the impact didn't stop at Burkina Faso's borders. Neighboring countries like Ghana, Senegal, and Mali studied Fatou's case and began tightening their own internal security protocols. What had started as a national scandal had become a regional case study in threat management. International media caught on as well. News outlets from around the world reported on the secret life of the cleaning staff, delving into how an ordinary woman had managed to infiltrate the highest levels of a nation's government. Analysts praised Burkina Faso's response, turning a security catastrophe into a comprehensive reform that would be studied for years to come. 5 years after the operation, Traoré reflected on the events during an international security summit. "The Fatou Diallo operation taught us how fragile security can be," he said. "But it also showed us that no threat is insurmountable if we respond with the right measures." In the end, what had been a devastating breach became a defining turning point. Burkina Faso's security systems are now considered among the most advanced in Africa. a global benchmark in internal threat management. Ironically, it was Fatu's betrayal that laid the foundation for this success. Her story is tragic, but deeply instructive. It exposed how international espionage networks exploit personal desperation, but also proved that with leadership, vigilance, and reform, even the gravest crises can become opportunities for strength. Fatou Diallo's 2-year espionage operation will forever remain a pivotal chapter in Burkina Faso's security history. A powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest threats are the ones closest to home, but with the right response, every threat can be transformed into resilience.